Hello and welcome to the Washington Times Politically Unstable. I'm Kelly Sadler, the commentary editor at the Washington Times. And today I am joined by Democratic strategist Julian Epstein. He was the former Democratic chief counsel of the House Judiciary Committee, as well as the staff director of the House Oversight Committee. Julian, welcome so much. Welcome to you. And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I want to get
Kelly, thanks for having me, and it's great to finally meet you virtually.
Yes, absolutely. Your opinion has aired on our pages. And, today we're really talking about the Democratic Party as a whole and where do they go from here? President Trump, we're in the midst of a government shutdown, don't know how long it's going to last. He complained from the Oval Office today. He doesn't even know who to negotiate with, that he's getting calls from moderates, Senate Democrats, but not Chuck Schumer. He questioned whether Chuck Schumer has the juice over the party or if it's AOC. Who is the leader of the Democratic Party right now?
Well, it's a great question, Kelly, and I wish I had an answer for you. I don't think there is a leader of the Democratic Party. The putative leaders of the Democratic Party are Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and maybe Barack Obama. But each of these men, who at one point I think could bear the mantle of leadership, have become very small people. They have cowered to the ideological progressive left. That is increasingly extremist, increasingly socialist, increasingly angry, increasingly belligerent and obstructionist. So it's an unwieldy party. There is no real leader. Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries have become too small of people to stand up to the left and say that they are wrong on a host of issues. And I think what they're doing on the shutdown is sort of playing small ball. They're looking for a tactical win. I don't think they'll get it. I think at best they'll get a draw. It may get worse than that because I think the public is going to recognize after another week of this that it's the Democrats who are voting to shut down the government. And given that they lost the House, the Senate, and the White House, it's a little bit narcissistic to insist that they're going to shut down the government unless they get their way on certain Obamacare subsidies, which, by the way, are subsidies that were supposed to be temporary, and they're looking to restore the subsidies for people that are well above 400% of the poverty line. So the more well-to-do of the Obama subsidy recipients. I don't think as this thing gets closer to and gets more scrutiny that it's going to be a very good position for the Democrats. They may get a one-year extension on the subsidies. That's about it. But the bigger point here, Kelly, is I think the Democrats are choosing the wrong fights. They're looking for some kind of tactical win. They're desperate. They're losing on almost every single issue, other than maybe healthcare, but on every other issue, whether it's border, crime, foreign affairs, the economy, they are far behind in double digits in most cases. And what the Democrats need to do is stop going to the socialist left and stop calling their opponents Nazis, their political opponents Nazis, and they need to start building. They need to start doing things like fixing the pathetic school system where 2/3 or more of our students are innumerate and illiterate. And they need to start getting the working class ready for the AI revolution. They're not doing anything constructive. It's all negative, and that's why their numbers are in the dumps.
I mean, do you think a part of that is just always having to oppose the president no matter what issue he's fighting on? President Trump has made crime a pillar of his presidency, and restoring law and order to a lot of these lawless cities. If we look at the city of Memphis, the Democrat mayor there is actually working with the president of the United States to combat crime. Muriel Bowser here in Washington, D.C. worked with the president to restore law and order. But then you look at the city of Chicago, where you have Brandon Johnson saying that the right wants another civil war. You got J.D.B. Pritzker calling, ICE agents and Border Patrol agents thuggish goons. You look over in the state of California with Gavin Newsom resisting every single attempt by the president to restore law and order. And then the city of Portland. And the narrative in all of these places are the same, is that our states are doing fine. Our cities are doing fine. We don't need your help. Get out of here. And it's like, resist Trump. But then when you actually go and interview residents of these cities, of these states, they're just like, yeah, we want safe neighborhoods. We want to live in safe neighborhoods. So do you think the Democrats are dealing with this issue wrong?
I think you stated it perfectly. I think the Democrats are incredibly out of touch. I'm a D.C. resident, and I can tell you there is a marked difference since the National Guard has been in D.C., and almost everybody I talk to says the same thing. I think you're going to see that kind of thing repeated in states. I mean, the crime rates, just you look at carjackings and murder, they've gone down significantly. I think 87% on carjackings, and I think the murder rate went down, certainly in double digits, the homicide rate. So I think there's just no question that it's having a positive effect. I think your question, as you started it out, is the Democrats just oppose everything that is Trump? And I used to think this notion of Trump derangement syndrome was sort of a silly thing, and I dismissed it. Now I actually think it's a real thing. I think if Donald Trump came out with a cure for cancer tomorrow, the Democrats will be opposed to it. And it's a culture that has become endemic in the Democrats. I think there is a nihilism culturally amongst many Democratic voters. People just, for some reason, they've lost faith, lost family, lost community institutions. They're looking for all this spiritualism in all the wrong places. And I think it's become sort of this reaction, primal yell, caterwauling that gives them a temporary sugar high if they can demonize the other side. And I think it's a bizarre and strange phenomenon that's growing culturally. Jonathan Haidt, who wrote the book, The Anxious Generation, speaks a lot about the disaffection, particularly of young people. We see it in the numbers with YouGov saying that 25% of young progressives now think violence is justified in certain circumstances. So there's a cultural malaise. There's a cultural decay that is occurring. And I think it's occurring much more on the left than it is on the right, although there's some of it on the right. But I think in terms of the crime issue, to get more specific, I think Donald Trump is going to start asking the question, and it would be a smart question to ask in places like Chicago and other cities where the homicide rate is anywhere from 20 to 40 per 100,000. That's 20 times higher than it is in Islamabad, Pakistan. So the homicide rates in U.S. cities, the Democrats like to say it's coming down. It may be coming down. It's still obscenely high. When you're looking at homicide rates above 10 per 100,000, you're looking at obscenely high homicide rates. Our homicide rates are 20, 30, 40 per 100,000 in certain cities. So the notion to say it's coming down is cold comfort for residents that live there. And I think the question that Donald Trump can ask to the politicians in Chicago is, do you care about Black lives only when it's ideologically convenient, or is your concern genuine? Because if your concern were genuine, you would be working with us to bring the homicide rates down in the south side of Chicago, where they're probably higher than 40 per 100,000. You're seeing 600 or so slayings every year, most of them Black on Black crimes. If Trump could cut that by a third, by a fourth, that would be a significant saving of Black lives, far in excess of any data or of any Black lives that are lost, unarmed Black men that are lost due to police conflict. So if the concern is genuine, if the concern is real, why would they not be working with the president to reduce these homicide rates in the inner city, which are obscene, only because they want to have this sort of rarefied debate about federalism and what's the proper role of federal law enforcement versus local law enforcement? Most voters don't give a damn about that. Most voters say, whatever you can do to reduce crime, do it. And if Trump can come in and cut it in half, I'm all for it. And that's the part that the Democrats don't get because they're in an ideological bubble that's out of touch.
You talk about this ideological bubble. I think there was a pivotal point a few weeks back when it came to Charlie Kirk's assassination. And I've been a conservative for decades now. I knew Charlie Kirk personally. Many within the movement knew him. And it was a horrifying moment for many of us. I'd say for hundreds of thousands of us. We saw his memorial in Phoenix and the people who turned out to pray. But at the same time, we saw this visceral reaction coming from the left of mocking Charlie Kirk, of demonizing Charlie Kirk, of taking his words out of context, saying he's not a person that you should look up to, that he's a relic of the Jim Crow era. Um, and many of us started saying, do we have a civil society? Can we have a civil society with the left? We've never viewed Democrats as people who would want to assassinate us, right? We always like to enter debate. We always like to challenge one another, because ultimately, when I was growing up, it was Democrats and Republicans want to do what's right for Americans. They just have different solutions to reach the same goal. Which is decreased poverty, which is decreased crime, which is achieving the American dream. We all have those goals in mind. We just might have different policies that take us there. But after Charlie Kirk's assassination and what we saw on social media, and then I'm going to bridge into it, Jay Jones here in Virginia, who is running for lieutenant governor, the top cop, fantasizing about taking out his political opponent with 2 shots in the head and calling his children little fascists that they're raising. What do we do about this? Because everyone wants to have, a healthy civil culture, but right now there's many on the right just thinking like we can't go out and debate these folks.
Yeah,
they're crazy and they want us dead.
Yep. And I think it's a rational fear. And I think we've moved into a cold civil war. And first of all, my condolences to you with your relationship with Charlie. I was a big admirer of Charlie. I think it was exactly the kind of person we needed and the kind of debate that we needed. I may not have agreed with everything he said, but I thought he used reason and debate and was open to the opposition and would extend his love to people that disagreed with him. And it's exactly the kind of thing we needed. I think, the Jay Jones thing is just horrific. The fact that he would be celebrating the murder of his political opponents and this sort of lame apology that he's making right now. And the fact that the bigger point to me on that, Kelly, is that the Democrats still have not rallied around getting him out of the race. In fact, they're rallying around him. The Senator, Tim Kaine from Virginia, said, well, he made an apology. And that's exactly the problem. There is a tolerance that is going on the left for the most vile kinds of behavior, the most sort of demonic, death cult celebratory kind of activity. If you saw with Kirk, it was even worse than I think the way you described. We had college professors who were celebrating his death, public school teachers, journalists who were explaining it away as a love story. A late night comic who we all know, who basically lied about the shooter. At the same time, I think the week after, we had the Chicago Teachers Union celebrating the life of a convicted terrorist in 1973. This is starting to happen extensively on the left, where there is a celebration of the violence culture and the death cult culture. I think it's an expression of the fact that the worst people on any side of an issue, when they start to think they're not just losing the political argument, but they're starting to lose the cultural argument, which I think the left is. Many of them resort to extremist measures and sort of rationalize it in their own mind. And I think the language that the Democrats are using when they start calling their opponents Nazis and fascists, which is an illiterate use of the word. It is a word that I think is encouraging violence from extremist fringes. I think it's part of the culture that is occurring on the left that is a very self-serving culture in the sense that it gets people attention and fundraising from certain segments of the online community, and it serves their interests in that way. But in terms of the larger polity, it's incredibly destructive. Coleman Hughes had a great piece a couple weeks ago, Kelly, where he spoke about Martin Luther King during the civil rights movement and how much the left, in particular the civil rights movement, actively worked on nonviolence. And he talked about the day of the 1963 speech. Bayard Rustin went around Washington, D.C., and was able to get an ordinance passed that would ban all liquor sales because they were trying to do everything they could to tamp down violence. Martin Luther King consistently spoke about the importance of nonviolence. What you see Democrats doing in the wake of Charlie Kirk's tragic assassination and the Jay Jones situation is they sort of say, well, have these lip service, meaningless platitudes about violence having no place. Well, that ain't good enough. If you're serious about turning back the drift towards this cold civil war, which could become a hot civil war, you have to actively practice nonviolence, tolerance, open debate the way Charlie Kirk did. You have to actively promote that as part of your liturgy, as part of your core program. And the Democrats are not doing it. On the contrary, they're quite aware that there is a violent and extremist element on the left, and they're too scared of them to actually stand up to them. And that's what I think the problem is.
Now, many Democrats that I've spoken to are fearful that the energy of the party is with the progressive left. AOC can energize people to follow her on social media. She gets the headlines. She got thousands of people to show up on the Fighting Oligarchy tour with her and Bernie Sanders. You're seeing Zohran Mamdani in New York City. Looks like he is just going to beat everyone in the race to become New York City's new mayor. He's talking about affordability, but he identifies as a socialist Democrat. The president would call him a communist, and many of his policy prescriptions are more communist in measure. But this is where Democrats feel like they need to chase to get the votes to win elections. What I'm hearing you saying is there needs to be more of a track back to the center to Bill Clinton when he stood up to his own party and had a sister soldier moment, basically put them in their place saying, we're getting too radical, let's pull back. I just see the Democrats heading further and further left, not actually moderating more to the middle. Where do you see the party going? And who would you define as the next leader, a true leader of the party come 2028? We know all of the familiar names that we speculate are going to throw their hats in the ring. But who could kind of restore a sense of normalcy? Because Republicans are going to have their own problems in 2028 too, especially when the MAGA movement kind of ends because Donald Trump can't run again.
You ask great questions, and embedded in your questions, I think, are some of my answers. I think that it is true there is a lot of energy on the left because the charisma is on the left. And it's easier when you take extreme positions, particularly in an online world, when you take extreme positions and when you attack the system, it's easier to get attention from the disaffected, from the downwardly mobile college eds who sort of would rather suck on the government teat than figure out what the folks, say, post-World War II did, which is how do we build a new economy in the artificial intelligence age. I think they're taking the way out. I think there's a culture with Gen Z that is a culture that's very entitled. It's very disaffected. And I think that all comes out of the universities. So how do we fix that is a larger, deeper cultural problem. As Breitbart said, politics is downstream of culture. I think it all starts with culture. I think a lot of it has to do with the smartphone era. People are living in an anti-intellectual age where they understand things through a 20-second video clip, which is not how you understand the world. I think there is that problem. I think that there is a huge problem with the schools and the education system, particularly universities, but also the public schools, K through 12. I think Trump is starting to get at that with his compact, but I think it needs to go further in terms of getting ideological balance into the university system. I think there's a big problem there. And politically, if you move from culture to politics, you have to keep in mind, Kelly, as I know that you know this, being the superb writer and keen political commentator, 70% of the country is still moderate or conservative. And while the progressives and the more extreme elements of the Democratic Party have the charisma and the energy of the left, it's not where the voters are. So what it's done is it's distorted the Democratic Party and moved them far to the left of where the median voter is on every single issue other than maybe healthcare. So you take crime, abortion, foreign affairs, the economy, you take any of the big issues, the A-list issues, and the Democratic Party is far to the left of the median voter. So what it takes is for a politician to do a Sister Soldier Bill Clinton moment, recognizing there's much more political gold in the political center and the political moderate side, but it means you have to take on the flying monkeys of the online left. And you have to have a big leader. You have to have a charismatic leader. You have to have somebody who's strong, who's courageous, who's willing to do it and say, look, you're wrong on this gender issue. You're wrong on crime. We should be doing much more on crime. We should, rather than 100,000 cops on the street like Clinton did, we should have 500,000 cops on the street. You're wrong on these issues. But it takes somebody who's willing up to do that, take the hits, but realize in the long term, there is greater political nirvana. The difficulty for the Democrats is that's bad primary politics. Nobody wants to be primary. But in the general election, the game plan I'm laying out is the plan back for the promised land, but the party cannot figure out how to do it. And again, it mostly goes to the fact that we have weak leaders.
What about the Democratic donor base? Because, I understand Republican politics a lot more than I understand Democratic politics. But Republicans are always chasing, if you want to run for office, you need to have money. And if you can't self-fund, then you need to appeal to donors. The Kochs were big-time donors, kind of more in the Bush era than they are in the Trump era. Trump self-funded for a lot of his reelect. But where is the donor class within the Democrats? And are they urging kind of a pullback to the center? Or are they encouraging the AOCs, the Zoran Mandanis, the more progressive left?
They are far to the left. The donor class is far to the left. And there's been a lot written on it. There's a great book called The Overproduction of Elites, which the basic thesis is there's so many elites, college-educated, pedigreed elites, that the only way they distinguish them amongst themselves culturally is by saying they are more ideologically pure on the oppressor versus oppression framework, and that they understand sort of the whole oppressor, the Western oppression theology, and they're going to be saviors for the world's oppressed people, and that's how they sort of distinguish themselves and make themselves feel good about themselves. Many of them really don't know a thing about policy or don't know a thing about the effects of the policies that the organizations they fund advocate. It's more of a sort of it's a narcissistic game played by people that have a lot of money, that want to be players in politics, and I think the best way they can get attention is by occupying the edges, the more extremist ideological edges, and sort of playing into this whole victimology psychosis that has dominated the left, I think, in the last 20 years, and that is moving them away from a much more constructive place like building. I mean, if you just simply look at the failures of the public schools, it's one of the issues I care about the most. I think it's just an absolute disaster for this country's future. The fact that we haven't moved more aggressively to compete with charter schools, and now even Mandami wants to get rid of high achievement schools in New York because he thinks they're racist. I mean, this is neo-Marxist ideology. But it takes courageous leaders to stand up to it. The one guy who I think is right on the substance of this is Rahm Emanuel, but I don't know that Rahm has much of a base. I hope he would have the charisma to sort of get out and sort of push back the party. I'm not sure about that, but I think he's sort of got the right framework, and he's throwing up a trial balloon, and whether that gets anywhere, we'll have to see. But I think you need others that are willing to do that, take on the left, get energy. I mean, we need leaders in the political center who have charisma. And that's the one thing that Bill Clinton did, even and Barack Obama did, although Barack Obama moved increasingly left throughout his presidency, which I think is a problem for his legacy. But we need another Clinton who has the charisma, who can do that kind of thing. And I don't see anyone on the horizon that really has that charisma to do it.
Last question. We saw a lot of pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protests that turned violent on college campuses last year in particular. We're on the second anniversary of October 7th. There were a lot of prominent Jewish Democrat voters who came out against those schools and started speaking out against anti-Semitism and against their own party, because the progressive left really does encourage these kind of terrorist ties. You had Bill Ackman, for example. He's not a Republican. But he took to social media and was very critical of Harvard, of Columbia, and said, we need to moderate. Alan Dershowitz, who is a liberal, right? But is just like, okay, the university system has gotten out of control and we need to pull back. And then you have like a lot of Silicon Valley, who traditional Democrat voters, who have spoken out against the Democrat Party. Why do you think a lot of these Jewish billionaires are so engraved in the Democrat Party they can't switch their vote? You're going to have Mandami almost win in New York City. And do you think that maybe the new leadership for the Democratic Party comes from because these guys are self-made billionaires who are not afraid to be controversial and buck their party in some ways?
I wish we had more time to talk about it. We could do a whole podcast on this. I think it's Ashkenazi guilt. I think it is a lot of Jews after, I might get in trouble for this, after World War II and after the horrors of the Holocaust, adopted this belief that if any group claims to be mistreated or oppressed or discriminated against, they will identify with that group given the experience that they had and the horrors of the Holocaust. And I think that was fine in the 60s with the civil rights movement and the 70s with the civil rights movement. I think it was the right thing to do. And I think today it has become it's moved from a philosophy to a theology. And I think the whole DEI industrial complex, which frames the world in terms of oppressors and oppressed, teaches people to think about their identity groups first and foremost. I think that has taken over the culture. And I think what a lot of Jewish leaders see now is it's gotten ridiculous and gotten completely out of hand when you actually have a pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas movement that celebrated the murder, the beheading, the burning of babies on October 7th, that openly declares that its goal is to destroy Western civilization. I think that was a big wake-up call for a lot of Jewish leaders. And I got to tell you, I mean, particularly with the news today, Kelly, where we may be on the verge of the most meaningful breakthrough in peace in the Middle East. I wrote about this in March, that I thought this was where it was going, and I thought Trump should get a Nobel Prize before all this Nobel chatter was out there, if it works. But I think what you're going to see is I think you're going to see Jewish Americans and a lot of moderate Americans who are pro-Israel, who know that Israel stands for everything the United States stands for in terms of our value systems, our pluralism, our tolerance of other peoples, all of that which has made the West great. I think you're going to see a lot of them move away from the Democratic Party and either move independent or move over to Republicans. I can't tell you the number of Jewish voters who have voted Democrats all their lives, have never voted for a Republican, never voted for a Republican president. I can't tell you the number of them that say to me today, Trump is doing an amazing job, and if the election were happening today, I would vote for Trump. That is happening in a much bigger number than I think pollsters recognize. I had a wonderful conversation with Leo Terrell, who is heading up the anti-Semitism task force of the Justice Department, and he's doing great work. He's on top of it, and they ought to be prosecuting these protests that are occurring at Columbia University and elsewhere. They ought to be using the hate crime statutes, 241 through 249 of Title 18, and they should be prosecuting these kids. When you and protesters who inhibit students from getting to classes, who are hitting students, Jewish students, with flagpoles, assaulting them, threatening them, all of those are violations of federal law, and these things ought to get prosecuted. And so Leo and I were talking about that, and this is something that's got to be taken much more seriously. And I think Trump is Trump is the first president that we've seen that is really taking this seriously. And I think Jewish Americans and a lot of others are taking note.
All right. Well, Julian, thank you so much for joining me. And we need to continue this conversation. So stay in touch and please keep submitting columns to the Washington Times. We appreciate you.
100%. Kelly, thank you very much.
Thank you.